Time now for a look through the papers. Diptyque Laurent. Diptyque, let's start perhaps here in France. A lot of the papers, I can see there, it's on the front page of Libération, focusing on the May Day protests. 1st of May neutralised is how Libération, the French-leaning paper, is looking at it.
Well, I think the general feeling in the papers is that it could have been much worse than it really was, even though what it really wasn't great either. But that's probably saying a lot about how the climate of France right now. The Labor Day holiday in France is traditionally a day when unions and political parties parade through the streets of Paris and all across the country. It's generally peaceful, but yesterday you had, adding to that, of course, the yellow vest protesters and ecologists who sort of added themselves to the mix, making it very much a day of disparate demonstrations. I quote La Croix, the French Catholic paper, saying, it must be said the Labor Day holiday yesterday showed none of the festivities usually associated with the day. For the paper, it was very much a day under high tension, clashes between extremist protesters and police, notably in Paris. For Libération, as we saw there and moments earlier, Eve, police managed to neutralize the demonstrations, notably containing the radical Black Bloc protesters who were threatening to wreak havoc across the country. Libération evokes what it calls a high turnout of 165,000 people across France, again under an atmosphere of high tension.
Getting really a lot of coverage. The first 6 pages of Libération devoted to the protests that were across the country. How did the French communist paper L'Humanité react?
Well, L'Humanité is actually hailing what it says was the success of the protests, of the union parades and yellow vest protesters, some of whom even marched together. Despite the violence, the paper says the marches were stronger than violence. Now, on the other side of the spectrum, you have the right-wing paper L'Opinion, focusing on what it says, or what it sees rather, as the yellow vest movement dispossessing the unions of the May Day parade, which is traditionally for the unions. In fact, major union leader Philippe Martinez, he's one of the biggest union leaders in France. He was actually forced to leave his march temporarily after being sort of attacked by some radical protesters. He's also now demanding answers, notably from the government.
Speaking of the government, a government minister was interviewed by Le Parisien, that's their front page this Thursday, looking at that reconstruction of Notre Dame.
Yeah, that's right. French culture minister is Franck Riester. Over 750 million euros were, of course, pledged in the hours after a part of the Notre Dame Cathedral was destroyed in a fire last month. French Culture Minister Franck Riester tells Le Parisien newspaper that all the money will go towards rebuilding the cathedral. He also talks about the cause of the fire, saying that it's still unknown if it was actually linked to ongoing renovation works taking place at the time. As to how the cathedral should be rebuilt, well, that's still a pretty big question. He let slip that architectural modernity would be a logical move. This despite around 54% of French people saying they actually want the cathedral to be rebuilt exactly the same way it was before.
I have to say, I've seen a few sketches that have caught my eye, putting an actual living forest on top of the Notre Dame. Who knows? Well, meanwhile, Diptyque, the Venezuelan papers are dominated, of course, by the clashes and protests there.
That's right. The battle between Nicolás Maduro and the opposition leader Juan Guaido continues. According to the local paper El Nacional, several people were injured, at least one killed in that violence yesterday. Guaido, for his part, says there is no we're at a point of no return. There's no going back now. He's calling on the army to get behind him and re-establish democracy. That's what this paper is focusing on. Últimas Noticias, that's a paper that's close to the government. Well, they're focusing on Nicolás Maduro's comments, calling Guaido supporters a, quote, little group of traitors, and condemning what he's calling a coup attempt. So not surprisingly, this paper focusing more on Nicolás Maduro.
Now, the Venezuelan military is so far not backing Guaido to any major extent, but the US military might be stepping in. We're hearing the rumbling again from Washington on that idea.
That's right. This keeps coming up. We've spoken about this in the papers earlier as well. We're not sure if it's actually going to happen, but the US has not ruled it out in any case. Venezuela really appears to be being played out as a proxy war. You've got the US backing Guaido on one end, Russia and Cuba supporting Maduro on the other side. The US is blaming Russia for keeping Maduro in place. This, as the Washington Post, interesting article today, revealing a blueprint plan by the opposition to remove Maduro from office that was thwarted on Monday. Russia, for its part, reiterates that only the Venezuelan people have the right to decide their future, warning U.S. against any aggressive moves. And we can show you also a cartoon from Antonio Rodriguez, who sees Venezuela as Donald Trump's failure. Maybe next time Guaido, once again, this really representing what Maduro has accused Guaido of being, a puppet whose strings are being pulled by the U.S., notably Donald Trump.
Finally, Diptika, for this press review, a quick word to end from Thailand. King Rama X has found his queen. And
not a day too soon. He's actually having his coronation ceremony this Saturday. And yesterday, in a rather quickie wedding, must be said, the 66-year-old monarch married Suthida Tidjai, a former flight attendant and his personal bodyguard, in what was a surprise wedding. Queen Suthida will take the royal throne alongside the king after his coronation ceremony. The pair on the front of the Bangkok Post. This is certainly a strange photo.
It is. I initially kind of thought, I don't love the way she's lying at his feet, but I look behind. She's not the only one.
Yeah, exactly, which I think makes it okay. And in fact, in this, I think this is part of the protocol. She's being anointed with powder on her forehead. So I guess it's a photo of immense respect towards her new husband. In fact, the king became king by default because his father died in 2016. The reason his coronation ceremony is taking place so long after is because there was a necessary mourning period in place. The king, it must be said, is a bit of a serial husband. This will be his fourth marriage. He's been married and divorced 3 times. He also has 7 children from those 3 previous unions.
Okay, one to watch. Thanks a lot, Diptika, for that wrap-up of the international papers. Time for us to take a quick break now.